Ramadan Mubarak to everyone and welcome. Today, it's my honor to introduce the poet Sadiyah Bashir, author of the 2018 collection Seven, which you can get in on Amazon. Please, everybody, order it. Seven is the number in Islam referring to God as the all-powerful creator. In Seven, Sadiyah explores her life journey as a young Muslim woman confronting battles with internal and external sexism and racism, and exploring radical self-love and healing. They are poems about both trauma and triumph. Sadiyah is a multifaceted artist born of a family of writers. She began writing poetry as a means of self-expression, becoming a two-time Youth Grand Slam poetry champion. Sadiyah has performed for international organizations such as Al Jazeera and UNICEF, and has been commissioned to write poems by Apple and Penny Appeal USA. She's currently working on a second manuscript documenting the history and lives of Black Muslims in America. And she said today in our conversation at noon that she was going to call the volume Mu'adhin after Bilal, right? These events were made possible by a Building Bridges grant from the Doris Duke Foundation in conjunction with Duke Performances and the Duke Islamic Studies Center. Our project seeks to give an additional platform for the work of Muslim American poets, musicians, and filmmakers of African descent. Our aim is to deeply engage in a process of reckoning, consciousness raising, and reconciliation through the arts. In doing so, we hope to raise awareness about ongoing issues of anti-Black racism and anti-Muslim bias in the North Atlantic world. But we also strive to engage in a process of historical contextualization of the rich tradition of Islamic art, and particularly the vibrant tradition of Black Muslim art that exists around us. Thank you so much, Sadiyah. Oh, I would like to thank the Doris Duke Foundation, Duke Performances, the Center of Muslim Life, Julie Maxwell, and Brian Valentine, and especially Sadiyah Bashir. Marhaban, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace, Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing the space with me, especially those of you who have fasted today. I'm going to be taking the time to read some of my poetry, both that's inside of my book Seven and outside of it. The first poem that I will be reading is called Bashir. It's my last name. My last name means the giver of good news. When my grandfather said, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger, we were both born, yet still a memory in God's mind. In my first breath, I was a poet. I come from a line of saying it with chest because the heart speaks the loudest. My grandfather is gone now. All I have is my truth and my grandfather's memory. And in this, we are both still alive. When I decided to write this book, one of the things my mentor asked me after reading my first first edits of my manuscript was, what about this book makes someone who doesn't know you want to pick this up? And so I started writing poems that were odes to my family and odes to my younger self. And that's where a lot of the poems come from in the beginning of the book. This one is entitled Good Fortune. It's what my first name, Sadiyah, means. When you say my name, remember, it was my parents' last recording of their legacy. Say it like the wind that scared you as a child. Watch it give humanity to your mouth. Say it like we met before, just souls circling heaven. like nostalgia. Your mouth was meant to give it life again and again. Watch us become as pure as children every time we are called. This is so interesting doing events on Zoom because I, I just I haven't done that many. I'm not on Zoom as much as most people during the quarantine, so it's always just so interesting. I feel like I'm just talking to myself in the mirror. This poem is entitled Building a Home in Sudan. Do you know how lonely it is, having a language written on your skin that you cannot speak? Bastard children of diaspora who know longing for cultural meaning in a place you were too Black to belong to anyway. There are very few words I know in Arabic besides Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Mafi mushkila, no problem. Ana ismi, my name is. Most of what I know in this language written on my skin is both pacifying and submissive. Everything I know my foremothers not to be. I still got so lost in boys whose skins actually translates into news coverage. These boys with mothers who have Napoleon complex, bitterness for Black. My grandfather lived in the country of the Sphinx. A boy's mother wanted to know how much of the Blackness she could make a mystery of my statue before she dared call me daughter-in-law. The first time my sister went to Egypt, they called her Abid. It means slave. When she stood next to a pyramid, an Egyptian man swore she was Cleopatra, clenching his heart like the pharaoh gasping for air when the sea came down on his lungs. Now, how do you translate that language? How could one man see slave and the other see queen by reading the same skin? 3 Black boys shot execution style in their home. I bellied their death like smoke. Now all my insides are charcoal. It makes me a blacker thing. The night they died, I cried a river to shame the Nile. A Muslim woman demanding their justice was replied to, quote, before we jump to conclusions, let's make sure it's not gang related and pray it's not Islamophobia. I'm not good with language, but from that I heard if a Black boy dies and there's no Islamophobia around to take the blame, it's okay to cripple his blood because it's probably gang related anyway. Tell me, what's the word for nigga in your language? When the uprising in Baltimore happened, a Persian man wrote a Facebook status saying, rest in peace, meaningful protests. I must have read this wrong. I'm not very good with language. Don't you mean rest in peace, Freddie Gray? He replied, no. I guess it's hard for people to comprehend me, but I'm sorry if a Black child's heartbeat is a dialect only I seem to understand. That poem I wrote as kind of an amalgamation of different experiences of anti-Blackness within the Muslim community. But one thing I wrote about towards the end was the murder of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. I lived in Baltimore for many years, and this is actually, I believe, the 4th anniversary of his death was last week. And so these are a few poems that I wrote after his death. This one is entitled Bad Luck. Watch your step in Maryland, Virginia, New York, America. You may be stepping on your ancestors' burial plot, disguised as an urban store where they sell your 40 acres and a mule as a t-shirt. This is what I hear when someone says, if you step on a crack, it'll break your mother's back. This one is entitled North Avenue. Yes, I broke the windows, the doors, took aim for shot at the walls of your convenience stores. This is not because I am angry. No, curiosity has stricken me. I wanted to see how much of your architecture was written off of the bones of my family. This is entitled Gentrification. This man with privilege to burn would call the cops on thunder if it roared too loudly. He glared at us as if to say, there goes the neighborhood. And I wonder, did the mouth of his home think the same when he came? Does he know the stone of his home is brown? The foundation of everything he rests in will only remind him of the people he tried to push out. I'm actually going to shift a little bit, considering the state of current affairs. I know for a lot of Black Muslims, a lot of Ramadans and a lot of Eids have centered around state violence, around the police, especially not too long ago, the beginning of Ramadan, a young Black man was murdered by police in Minneapolis. This poem is entitled Mama's Gun. We do not play with guns, shouts an African mother as her Black son reaches for a toy water gun at a convenience store. He's no older than 3 years old. The clerk promises her it's harmless. She says, my son will never play with guns. This is a promise she is making to herself. When a Black mother warns against a gun, she means if you want to use water to wash off blood, do it the right way at the sink. Or, I've been watching the news and I'll be damned if I ever allow the news to watch me. We Americans wonder what wars people from other countries fled to make it here. But last week, the mall I work at got shot up twice and I didn't flinch from my passport. The metro station got shot up and my baby was asleep as we ran. I think about the mother at the convenience store. I think about how police raided a baby girl's home and sleep was the last thing she knew. The bodies decay, but the bullets stay. Does that make the soil as angry as I am? The people want gun control, but my father watched police drop off guns in the hood, then defended the Black boys who used them against the testimony of the same police officers. Does that make the country as angry as I am? What is gun control to police when they kill with cameras on their chest? When a white man shoots a gun, it seems more muscle memory than mental illness. I live in a frame someone wants to kill, so everyone I birthed does too. So everyone I love does too. And because I am a mother, bullets and screams and sirens have made me an almost heavenly quiet. I am resting my tongue and warming my body for the day I have to explain to my children why we don't play with guns. I think one of the things that is important about being Black and Muslim is that there's this almost very rare legacy that we have. And so lately I have been writing to try and capture that legacy. Try to capture the very small things that I think people love to mention during Black History Month and stuff like that, and really expand on it in a way that's kind of within our oral tradition. A lot of us come, Black Americans specifically, a lot of us come from enslaved West Africans, and a very prominent position at the time was the griot, the person who could tell the story. And I think also too, one of the interesting parts about being Black and Muslim is that the poet also in Islamic tradition had I say had in past tense on purpose, but had a very important role in society. So this poem is actually one that's very near to my heart, as it's a collective history about being Black and Muslim in America. I wrote this, I saw an article that said that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib swore in on Thomas Jefferson's Quran. And the article was false. It turned out she swore on her own Quran, because if you're Muslim, why wouldn't you, right? Why would you need to borrow someone else's? But let alone a slave owner. But what really was astonishing to me was the amount of people who were sharing this article as if like, oh my God, this was such a wonderful thing. And oh my God, I didn't know Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, in a very like positive way, as if anything about Thomas Jefferson could ever be positive. And so it was one of those situations with which, as a Black Muslim, I kind of got caught off guard, and I was like, wow, people are celebrating this myth. And so this poem is entitled Muslim Fingerprints on Thomas Jefferson's Quran. When you swear an oath, use your right hand. When you sign into office, use your right hand. When you hold the Quran, use your right hand. Before I had a country or a flag, I had a hand. You know, hands make flags, and hands make countries, and hands separate a mother's from their child's, and order the work that separates bone from muscle. You know, you can't make a religion with your hands. No matter how hard they try to grip gospel into grimace, sell slavery as salvation, it ain't ever surprised me how the devil can see God when we can't. I have my great-grandmother's hands, who has her grandmother's hands, who bound our family's history in Bibles their slave masters gave them so the pages could feel the mercy of angels again. Women raped by masters to give birth to children with hands who do not look like theirs, who learned to write by tracing the trauma on their fathers' backs. We wrote the Lord's Prayer in Arabic as the first rebellion. We found East on every plantation as the second. We know calling these devils by their first names will not make us forget our last. You know, Nat Turner was a preacher, an imam, his gun, and amen. When they killed him, they ate his body like communion, like breaking back instead of breaking bread. And we've died these deaths again and again. That's why Moses' story is the most told in the Quran. And God gonna repeat it. Like I said what I said. And Thomas Jefferson gonna read it, and it's gonna go over his head. Our favorite thing about the fire is the smoke, how it raises to God like hands in praise dance, like hands saying Allahu Akbar in prayer. So we burn the plantation down. And that's why we don't trust the devil. He was made of a fire without any smoke. He has all the disaster without any of the warning. And we, the children, ask, how do you get rid of a Quran? You burn it for a moment, give it a holy light. We then ask, how do you get rid of a slave master? The reply, you burn it in darkness for eternity. So that poem, as I said, really holds a special place in my heart, as it speaks about a truth that I feel like we kind of gloss over in times of like I said, Black History Month and things like that. And we don't really think about how these are the lived experiences of people, especially our ancestors. And so I've been writing a lot about Black Muslim identity over the years. I am a third generation Black American Muslim in my family. My grandfather took a Shahada in the 1950s. And my father was born into Sunni Islam. And so from that, I actually have quite quite a long history to look back to, but also a history that is still very detached, as a lot of Black Muslim identity and Blackness is detached, considering how a lot of us got here. So I wrote this poem. I was given a prompt. I am not the best poet when it comes to prompts. I will be the poet that will be at a workshop and they give a prompt and I will write in one line and that's it. Whereas like everyone's writing full poems. But this was one time where I was given a prompt and I was actually able to make something out of it. The prompt was to write about a library. So I wrote about the libraries of Timbuktu. I want to go back to the libraries of Timbuktu. Somewhere, the Dewey Decimal System dissolves itself into a dialect my great, great, great grandmother understands. A library where quiet doesn't exist because we speak with our souls. My prayer to step inside their walls and feel home. To no longer feel like an erasure poem, an anthology where most of the contributing author's name is written in invisible ink. I want to read about astronomy in the 11th century, how we house God under stars with names he gave us, how we call a mansion of stars a council, how we seek counsel in the starlight of ourselves. These libraries that holds records of our prayer, a building that can testify for us on Judgment Day, where the walls say Ameen after every prayer, the Quran written on tree bark. I want to read the poetry of the 12th century. Let the storytellers inspire me, because somewhere I am hoping is my ancestry. I am somewhere's child. I am looking for the map my foremothers traced on papyrus to guide me home. I want to go back, but time makes centuries singular and makes me the successor of everything my family once knew. So I stand here, reimagining Timbuktu inside myself, making my ribcage a shelf, protecting my heart like a scripture written in gold. I will speak an elegant word. My last name means the giver of good news. My grandfather wrote it in ink and sent it as a love letter to our family. My prayers have to be answered, for God wrote the scrolls I've been looking for in my DNA. I am the griot I asked for. This body, the library that has been here and will continue to be, standing amongst everything that's ever tried to dismantle me. So centuries from now, my daughters' will speak their names like ceremony, like questions they never had to ask in the first place. They will not have to reimagine a past when they have my words to point them to the future. So today, I stand here, both my ancestors' collection of work and my daughter's library, bridging the gap I now know to call this body home. So one of the interesting things about that, or about my writing really, is before I had daughters, I was writing about having daughters, which is very interesting because now I have two. Life comes at me fast. I love to say that all the time. Anytime someone's like, oh my God, you're 24 and you have two kids. I'm like, yeah, life comes at you fast. So there's a poem in 7 that I wrote. This was around the time of the Say Her Name movement, when it first came about. And the poem is entitled Say Her Name. It's short. Dear daughter, when I dug into the most divine book of language to find your name, I did not choose one that could ever be synonymous with ghost. So that was a poem that I had written before even having any children. And it's so interesting because earlier today, someone asked, you know, what's the difference of your writing now since you've become a mother? And I think one of the major things is that I have moved from like the ego of poetry of like wanting to be like one of the greats and stuff like that. That would be nice. But I moved more so into kind of creating like a tangible legacy, a tangible words for my children to have, to look back on, for their children to have, etc. And so one of the poems that I had written after my daughter was born, I had a father growing up who loved to tell me if I had a question about anything, this is before Google, to look it up. Um, then when Google existed, it got a little bit easier, but before that, it was a little bit harder. And so after having my daughter, I was like, obviously, I'm not going to have the answers for everything, but I wanted to write a poem that could kind of point her in the direction for if I have an answer for everything, and to also give her some answers. So, people say, let babies cry. It'll make their lungs stronger. I have never been okay with teaching you to build your body on the foundation of your misery. Some days, all we have is our breath. So when you cried, I cradled you until your worries scarpered, because I knew you would need the air later, like to run as the wind gathers your hair, like recalling a memory, or to dance with rhythm your grandmother's grandmother gave you. All the memories that take your breath away will begin you, like birth. All the people who tried to take your breath away will end you, like a broken sentence. It's hard to speak when no one will listen, even harder when you don't believe your words. If you ever become your own enemy, inhale. Remind yourself what the world tastes like. Let her know you have enough to deal with. When the world becomes too much, exhale. Let it know that you have a flavor too. Every day, you will become the keeper of saving your life. For true time isn't measured by seconds, but by breath. So trust no one who speaks only to hear the sound of your voice. When you speak, make sure climates will change, waters will sing, something will find its way back home. When you fail your body, remember one day it'll give testimony. Ask for its forgiveness. It will always accept. If you feel like you can no longer breathe, write or come home. Here in my arms is all the air I've saved for you, all yours, because you cannot breathe as I do. It'll cause you to run at my pace. And where will you go with the last vestiges of my footsteps? So I leave behind this memory of words, here to say, sometimes all we have is our breath until we don't. Um, so that's kind of one of the poems I've written since becoming a mother, how my perspective has changed. That I think is just very important. Um, I'm going to do two more poems. I'll do two more poems. This one is from the book. It's entitled Selloff. Um, I thought about very hard of what I want my words to be when I'm no longer here. I think about that a lot. And also what my words to leave behind if I ever stop writing for some reason. If I am to be anything in this world, let me be a mercy of God sent and God sent. Let me be a water waiting to be weighed in, a stone kicked over when the sea split, same one Daoud struck the giant with. Let me be an itch in the throat of the whale. God is the most benevolent, the most merciful. He says, if you take one step to him, he will run to you. On that day, let me be good stamina and footing only a toddler can deny. Let me be a language given to Black folk that never fades or dies, like Musa's story. Let me be a sandstorm of a mother. When my lover comes, I am his cot, a well of Zemzem, an Olympian in which all my footsteps are sacred, and every one of my children must walk through them, getting me from Safa to Marwa or Baltimore to Philadelphia, and ain't no free land like the one I've bled or burst for. Let me live a life worthy of the birth of an Amin or an Amen, leaving a child's lips, the eyes for which we see God inside of us with. There are people going through Judgment Day as we speak. Lord, let me be a right hand for lifting or holding my Quran. So that poem is kind of about a legacy that I want to leave behind, the type of person I want to be, how I want to be remembered. And not too long ago, I was thinking about essentially Muslims, we always say this thing. It's like pray your prayer as it pray this prayer as if it's your last, or fast this fast as if it's your last, because nothing is ever guaranteed. We never know. And I always heard that, but never knew how to internalize it. Um, and I wanted to dive into um, the idea essentially of what could my last important moment look like. So this poem is called Invitation to Last Iftar. I will walk home with my arms filled. On my left, a banquet of food for breakfast. On my right, my great granddaughter's hand. As we walk, a road colored in a complexion I can only imagine exists within the future, I will point to streets with new names and tell her, when I was your age, what existed here knew how to keep its belly full. I will fuss with my children on the proper amount of salt and brown sugar to go into the greens. As I tether the last of whatever patience they have, I will remind them that what comes from this recipe taught us all how to chew. When the sun begins setting, I will ask one of these kids to describe its colors, yet correct them at every response. If you won't say it like my husband would, why do you have his mouth? When the food is done, we will eat. And if the food is done right, my taste buds will begin resurrecting people who once lived here just in time for us to bow our heads and breathe in the turquoise of our prayer mats. When the night winds down, I will begin telling stories of first fast and yesterday towns, where I got married, how a hot Ramadan day is the best way to start a romance. The space and we left in our bellies for air caressing nostalgia. Everyone in this room may not be what I knew, but rather what I birthed to give back. As I lay to sleep, I smelled my first Ramadan as a child, then as a woman, breathing in a holy night. My family will wake before the sun to eat. The call to prayer reminding them, As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. Prayer is better than sleep. Hopefully, my soul will no longer know the difference. Thank you all so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate having this space and this time. Please buy my book. Please support my work. Hopefully I'll have a website coming soon, but if anyone wants to follow me on social media, all my social media is at Ida B. Wellin. So IDA, the letter B, WELLIN. Thank you, Julie. Um, I appreciate you all so much. All of the poems from Seven, and some of the poems that I read today will hopefully be in the next manuscript. So I hope that you enjoy the sneak preview I'm giving you all.
So Samaya is asking the question, saying, thank you so much, such moving work. And asking, when did you start writing poetry and what inspired your desire to write?
I come from, as Ellen mentioned in the bio, I come from a family of writers. My father is an author. I have four siblings before me, and every single one of them has dabbled into poetry or writing music at some point. So that was kind of something that was natural and innate, but I never saw myself kind of going on that path until my mother was kind of like, you need to do this. In fact, she told me to do it for a competition. I was like, Okay. And through that kind of sparked this natural desire I had to be heard, especially as the youngest, especially as a Black Muslim, and especially as a young girl growing into womanhood. So that's really where the foundation of starting poetry, writing poetry started for me.
If anybody would like to ask questions, you can ask them in the chat or you can ask them directly of Sadiyah. Bilqis says, very well done and congratulations on your book. And Samaya says, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Don't be shy, everyone.
Okay.
You gonna go ahead?
Someone said, do you think that your poetry / being a writer helped you become the mother you are today? Absolutely. One of the things that really pushes me in poetry, and that a lot of my mentors in poetry push me to do, is to be transparent, and to try my hardest to tell the truth. And so within that comes a lot of inner child work for myself. Um, a lot of that comes with the transparency of looking at my own ego and my own hypocrisy, and naming that. And I think a lot of that goes into the type of mother that I try to be. I try to look at what it is that my inner child needs and understands that, and try to give that to my children. And I also try to be as transparent as possible with who I am and what I'm capable of. And all of that is through Allah first and foremost. And how Allah gave that to me was through my journey of poetry. Let's see, who are young up and coming poets we should be looking out for? Ooh, it's a very good question. Huh. So I always have to shout out my poetry community. So
besides you, obviously. Besides you. But
so the Baltimore City youth poetry team is the community of poetry that I come from. They're ran by an organization called Do More Baltimore, and it's spelled DEW, Be More. So they cultivate a lot of young poets within the area. So that's definitely someone, a community actually of people to look out for. I think some other people to look out for, Hannah Sawyer. She's a friend of mine, an amazing poet, and she actually just got a publication deal. So her book will be out very soon, which is definitely exciting. Mecca Verdell is another amazing poet. You can Google her, she's everywhere. And it's spelled Mecca, Mecca, last name Verdell. So yeah, a lot of my friends, I think about the fact that you know, so many writers back in the day used to know each other. You know, like the Toni Morrisons and Lucille Cliftons and stuff like that of the world used to like know each other, and they were homegirls. And I love the fact that me and all my friends are writers. And hopefully one day people will look back and say, oh my God, they all knew each other. You rightfully call out anti-Black feeling in the Muslim world. I hope you are changing hearts and minds. I hope so too. Do you know how your work has been received in that community? I know how my work has been received amongst Black youth in the community. I don't really look towards or have gotten a lot of feedback from non-Black Muslims about that work. So I know that a lot of people have kind of echoed and the sentiments that I've had, especially young Black Muslim women who are starting to get into poetry, have kind of felt as though I know some have said like they were the first, I was the first Black Muslim poet that they had ever seen. And that was an honor to me to be able to kind of be that person, and also to be able to pass the mic and say, you can do this as well. Just because I shared my specific story of anti-Blackness doesn't mean that you can as well. So that's pretty much how I have seen it to be received. I write and perform poetry too. Writing is my escape and therapy, my question apart from the normal teaching of Islam that invokes our thoughts of morality. Are there other inspirations for your poems that seem to come from a place of urgency and legacy? Yes. Um, I won't say it's really outside of Islam because I try to find Islam in everything. Um, so I won't really say that's outside of Islam, but a lot of what creates the foundation for how I can write, how I have the confidence to write, are other Black women writers. So a lot of Toni Morrison, um, and I do mean a lot of Toni Morrison, a lot of, I'm into sci-fi, so I love Octavia Butler. Um, a lot of other Black women poets, so Alicia Harris, Jasmine Mans, etc., kind of creating a foundation for myself that allows me to say that there are others going through this and I'm not alone, is really, really important for me. And as I said, I don't really think of that as like outside of Islam. I just see it more so as this is what Allah has guided me to. Oh, thank you. Someone said thank you for what you do. What is my favorite poem that I have written? That depends on the day of the week. It depends on the day of the week. It depends on the moment that I'm in. Recently I wrote a poem and it's called The Muezzin Sings the Blues. And that's my favorite poem right now. It talks about essentially mass incarceration and how a lot of people have become Muslim through mass incarceration. And it's one of my favorite poems because I never read a poem about that. You know, especially for Black Muslims, we talk about it a lot, and a lot of us see it in our families. You know, people get put into prison and become Muslim, but I've yet to actually see someone write about it. So I am very excited to have written about it, and it be good, because that's another thing. You write about it, it's not necessarily something that you feel is a good poem. So yeah, that's currently my favorite poem that I've written right now. How do you work through writer's block? So this is a very good, great question, because I come from a family that believes that writer's block is a myth, that is not really a real thing. Like your brain isn't actually actively trying to block you. I don't know how I feel about that theory. Some people love it. I'm kind of on the fence about it. But originally, it was very stressful. The first time I ever got writer's block, especially because I was about 16 years old, I was in the slam poetry community, which slam poetry is very fast, very active. There's a slam next week, you got to write a new poem type of thing. And it got to a point where, like, for 6 months, I couldn't write anything. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, what am I going to do? I'm quitting poetry forever. But so it was a very stressful time. It was a very, very stressful time for me. And my favorite surah in the Quran is Surah Duha. And it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, after 6 months he hadn't received revelation. So it was very interesting to kind of draw that parallel of me not being able to write for 6 months, and my favorite surah being about a time where the Prophet hadn't received revelation, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, hadn't received revelation for 6 months. And so I looked to that And the poem, the surah is so reassuring. It's like it's about reassurance of like Allah has you, Allah has got you. And so now I kind of take writer's block as a resting period and I just chill. I like a few months back, I had writer's block because it's COVID and a lot of things are happening and whatever. And I was just chilling, and people were like, "When's the last time you read a poem?" I'm like, I'm the words will come to me eventually. And also, too, I had to realize that in order to write, right, you have to live. So if all I'm doing is writing and I'm not living, then there's a crucial part of my writing that's being missed. So sometimes it's okay to just kind of allow yourself to live so that you can come back, exactly, reset and refresh and have the words that you want to put forth into the world. So that's kind of how I deal with writer's block now. Plus I have 2 kids, so I'm not stressing myself out over not writing for a few months. Like,
I know it's so hard on Zoom, but you did a great job and it was really beautiful.
yeah.
Ramadan Mubarak to everybody. Thank you.
Ramadan Kareem. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Duke.